these regulations that you're having is not really stopping the market. And what's really sad, what you're seeing is that both state governments and our federal regulators are not only not promoting the use of like harm reduction, they're failing to actually even promote it.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged Podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liza. I'm WVA's community manager, and you're listening to the podcast Vaping Unplugged. You can get your podcast everywhere where you get your podcasts, on Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube, or on any other platform. As you know, we're discussing vaping policies worldwide, and today we will be talking about vaping in the USA. And to dive deeper into this exciting topic, we have invited Lindsey Stroud, who is the director of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Center. Hi, Lindsey. It's very nice to have you today.
Thanks, Liza. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be joining y'all. I mean, even though all the policies in the United States are terrible, but
it's a pleasure, and let's talk about all of that in a minute. But before we start talking about the policies and legislative background, as an opening question, I usually ask our guests how they got into vaping, what's their journey. So what's your personal journey when it comes to vaping advocacy?
Yeah, so I got started, and like for people who don't know me, I kind of come from the think tank approach of the vaping policy. I know some people think it's advocacy. I'd like to think it's policy. With that, I'm kind of usually yelling at lawmakers, but in 2016, I started working at the Heartland Institute, which is a conservative free market think tank in the United States that focuses a lot on state level policies. And I was smoking cigarettes, and when they hired me or when I was interviewing with them, they had done some work on vaping, and they're like, "Oh, you smoke? Oh, you can work on vaping." I had no idea what it was. I mean, I'd seen vape shops. I was just like, "Oh, whatever." I mean, that was 2016, so it was very boxy, big. I mean, lots of vape enthusiasts. A little bit, you ain't from around here, if you show up into a vape shop type of, it wasn't very accessible. But I started doing research and looking at these state issues. At that time, it was a lot of taxation, including e-cigarettes into clean indoor air policies, increasing the age, actually just making an age restriction. When e-cigarettes did come to the United States, there was no age restriction on them at all. I was seeing a lot of government, just to say the least. It was kind of like getting a civics lesson. And it kind of really intrigued me to see how many of these vape shops these owners that believed in the product and they had actually quit smoking using this product, dealing with, state, local and federal legislative wise. Then you had courts coming into it. Then you've got health departments. I mean, it is a very like civics. If you need to take a civics class, go look at a modern American vape shop. And just kind of started doing a lot of research. So with that, figuring out a way of how I could help supplement what the vape shops are doing from the think tank policy approach. And so now I'm kind of just a numbers person. I can tell you any given state, like any state, how many smokers that they have or people who smoke, how many vapors. Actually, I've started doing those numbers now that the CDC is actually giving us that data. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in the thing. And now that I've realized how long I've been doing it, it's kind of like freaks me out sometimes.
That's actually, you came closer to my next question, because my next question was to explain what's the current legislative status in the US when it comes to vaping. Does it differ in terms of states? Because I understand there might be differences. And just to explain to those people who might not be aware, because we usually invite people from different countries and they bring a lot of insight of what is going on locally. So I'd like to get that insight from you now as a general review of what it looks like in the US.
Absolutely. And thankfully at TPA, Taxpayers Protection Alliance, the Consumer Center, we do have an international fellow, Martin Cullup, who's been a guest on this show. So I've got a little bit of an idea of how different vaping regulations can be across the globe. So in the States, there's there's federal regulation. So at the federal level, all the United States, and if you're listening to anything going on here, that's all at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the FDA, which they did not get authority actually to regulate e-cigarettes until like 2011 with a court case that decided that. Okay, civics lesson in America time. And it wasn't until 2016 that they established rules and regulations at the federal, state side, state level, all the state level, in terms of what e-cigarettes can come to market, when they had to be on market, you had to give like a list of all the ingredients to the FDA. Like back in 2017, you had to be registered with them. I can tell you that they've done a poor job with all these regulations that they've put in play. All of it kind of ended up accumulating into 2020 with the pre-market tobacco application, or the PMTA, which I'm sure a lot of people have listened to and seen that. So I know in Europe, the process to bring in a product to market I think it is at the federal level, is you do a notification process. As long as it's under the EU, as long as you have all your ingredients and everything's kosher, you can bring it to market, as long as you're not selling to kids and things like that. In order to bring legally under the federal level to bring a product to market in the States, you have to get FDA to authorize this product. And that's the pre-market tobacco application process, which they keep saying that they need scientific proof and science and studies. So it is a notification. There is no standard. To date, at the federal level, we have only 23 FDA authorized products, all available only in tobacco flavors. So technically, the entire vaping marketplace in the United States is all contraband products. And the fact that the FDA does not regulate them, they've actually issued denial orders to a lot of these products. We have a proliferation of like disposable products that I highly doubt they actually did put PMTAs, but that's at the federal level. At the state level, then you've got more imposing regulations, about over, I want to say it's almost 40 states now that impose their own. Okay, now we'll go to taxes. Sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place. So federally, there is no tax. Okay, so when it comes to regulation, most products are not approved or authorized federally. There is no federal tax on e-cigarettes. And they've been trying for years to change that. At the state side, there's a whole different list of that you've seen with regulations and with taxes. So with regulations, you've got 5 states that have now banned the sale of flavored vapor products. 2 of those states have also included full flavored tobacco bans, so menthol cigarettes. And those are the states are California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island have all banned flavored e-cigarettes. California and Massachusetts have also banned flavored tobacco products. You see, there's really no regulation as far as ingredients getting authorization to sell these products like you see with the FDA. You do have several states, though, that are implementing what you'd call like registries, so that the product had to have been approved by or authorized by the FDA in order for it to be sold in the state. So again, a lot of this, and then the taxes, there's about taxes at least in over 30 states on vapor products, and they differ. So far, they're less of a tax than the cigarette tax. So that's hopeful, but they are kind of usually applying like the other tobacco products tax to it. Bottom line, when it comes to U.S. regulation and stuff, is a major lack of enforcement. It's really hard to enforce. Like I said, the FDA has only authorized 23 products. Technically, those are the only products that can be sold, but like, I still get my vape products. I can go to a gas station and get a bunch of disposables. And I'm in Florida, especially. So I know in California, one of the major tobacco companies just did a discarded cigarette pack study and also looked at discarded vaping devices. And like 99.9% of the devices that this team went out and just picked up, used disposables, 99% of them were flavored. So you don't really have these regulations that you're having is not really stopping the market. And what's really sad, what you're seeing is that both state governments and our federal regulators are not only not promoting the use of like harm reduction, they're failing to actually even promote it.
Right. So, as you mentioned, FDA has some of the products that are approved as a smoking cessation tools, right? But if you go and check out what those products are, vaping is not going to be on the list. So, what do you think about that stance? Has it been progressing? Is there a chance that it might change this vision at least, or would you change anything? Like, what's your opinion about that?
Well, so yeah, the FDA so far, well, the 23 products that the FDA has authorized have been quote unquote, approved for the protection of public health. Okay, so that is the standard that they keep making with bringing a tobacco product to market, a newer one using the PMTA process, because there's another way that you could bring a tobacco product to market in the United States, and that's a substantial equivalence process. So if you've got and that has to be if you've got a product that was substantially equivalent to a product that was on market in 2007, it's pretty easy to get this through the regulatory process, which means it's all combusted products. So the science of harm reduction is completely missing. Sorry, excuse me for a second. And with the FDA's, it does recognize that e-cigarettes are safe, that are less harmful. I think when you read the existing the existing e-cigarette products that and they even with the heated tobacco product too, the heat not burn device, the IQOS not only did they get a PMTA through, they also got a modified risk tobacco order through too, which allows them to market their product as being less harmful than e-cigarettes. Unfortunately, due to the free market, another tobacco company came in and it's a patent dispute and why we don't have access to that, not anything to do with regulations. I think with e-cigarettes, the agency's having a very hard time responding to the market and how quick it grows, that it's and because they haven't set any standard, especially when it comes to flavors. It's just been they might sit here and say that they're not banning it, but so far they've only authorized 23 products, all made by big tobacco companies, all that are only available in tobacco flavors, and also that are just not the best they're good devices to get people off of cigarettes. As far as like vaping, they don't really offer all the whole really tapering down your nicotine. They don't offer the full variety of what a vaping product can be. And I get why the FDA doesn't want to do that. I guess you have product liability, and but at the same time, they're not embracing tobacco harm reduction, if that makes sense, and the science behind it. And I think it's because they're just trying to control it, and trying to control it the way that they control other drugs and everything, where it's easy for them to see what's going into a pill and have that being manufactured out from one central location. It just fails to recognize what tobacco harm reduction is for a lot of people, and what the vape is, what the vape shop is, what vape flavors are, like that personalized process, the consumer, the end consumer. And no, I don't have any hope for it. Quite honestly, I do think that the FDA is beholden to a different industry that's not, and I think that there's a complete disdain towards big tobacco. I think there's also a serious miscommunication to consumers, to the science, to even the general public, and like the teachers who are dealing with the so-called youth vaping crisis, because there's this disdain towards all tobacco products that they won't even recognize harm reduction, and that we have to stop tobacco. Even, the Tobacco Control Act itself, the FDA doesn't approve any the tobacco products. It only authorizes that. And so you'll go to like state hearings and you'll hear the opponent organizations use that all the time, that the FDA hasn't approved this, they haven't approved this, they haven't approved this. Well, the FDA can't approve it just because the way that you put that and I'm not advocating for THR products to go under the medical pathway just so they can get approved status, but I do think it helps lead to a lot of the misperceptions that are stemming from the agency itself. And then again, not stopping any of the industry. If you look at, I don't know why disposables are getting a lot of flack right now, because I just remember the heydays of like Juul and everything, and seeing all the fake Juuls, the Eon smoke and everything, and it's like you couldn't control that then. Now you just need to figure out a way how we can have regulated products in market, so consumers aren't just using all unregulated products like if that makes sense. And I hope I answered your question. I went off on a tangent.
For sure. And I also want to get back to the topic of misconceptions a little bit later. But before that, I also wanted to discuss a little bit the E-Valley case because I think it affected vaping and its reputation a lot. So I'm sure everyone in the vaping community knows already what it was. There was an outbreak in 2018. The way it stands for e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. However, it's not the same as nicotine vaping. And I want you to explain to our listener what is your stance on how CDC's perception on E-Valley actually affected vaping, and maybe just also we could talk why it's not the same as nicotine vaping.
So, I hate E-Valley, and I always call it vaping lung injuries. I hate the term. I hate still talking about it. So yeah, August 2019 is you started seeing state health departments that were noticing clusters of adolescents, young adults, and then I mean there were actually the average age of a lot of the people who were patients wasn't as young as you would think. That were coming to the ER with lung issues. And one of the things that they all had in common was that they were vaping. And of course, 2019 was when you started seeing the real big push from Bloomberg funded organizations. You started seeing flavor bans coming at a state level and stuff. So this was like, wildfire being spread around. It was like September, the CDC started actually doing a national tracking. So like the way that they should have done COVID, actually, having this centralized place that all the state health departments could be feeding information into the CDC. The CDC was giving weekly updates. I was still at the Heartland Institute at that time, and I had a stinking suspicion of what I thought it was, but I was actively tracking the state health departments every Sunday, going through all 50 state health departments, because at that point, a lot of them were actively doing weekly updates, monitoring these cases, having all their ER departments, give it to their state health department or their county health department to go pass up to the CDC. The CDC was doing weekly updates as well for about like 3 months there. Just how many cases you had. And it was starting to come out very early. Actually, the first two states that were really that this was coming out of was Wisconsin and Illinois, that these were illicit products, often containing tetrahydrocannabinol or THC oil. And they were pretty much under fake cannabis vaping brands. But this wasn't being relayed by the CDC. You did have state health departments that were being actually more transparent about the cases on that this was THC products, that these were do not use, this was not all e-cigarettes. Do not use e-cigarettes that you don't know where they're coming from. Do not use THC brands. And I think there's over 2,200 cases. There's about 68 people who ended up dying when all was said and done, or they attributed their deaths to this. And I want to say over 70%, 76% of cases were THC reporting. Now, a lot of this was self-reporting, which was another problem with this, like how they were identifying these cases. Because I remember reading about, they looked at 5 patients. One of the patients was like a 15-year-old, and they had self-reported that they had only vaped nicotine, yet an analysis of their urine or blood had found that there was THC in their system. So it's terrible. But what you did have was like the CDC that was pretty much telling, do not vape. And then every news media that you were seeing, they kept putting Juul up there, or just, these popular vape brands that's nothing was attributed to that. I hesitate doing saying that nicotine never killed any of these, because like I said, it's self-reporting. We do not know. You can go, this one guy is on New York City Craigslist selling his own little e-liquid juice. Okay. And if you're buying e-liquid juice off of the illicit underground market, you don't know what you're getting. You might not even be getting nicotine, thinking that you are getting nicotine. But when it all was said and done, when it came to the vaping lung injuries, that they were able to identify a vitamin E acetate, they were actually able to also identify several underground vape brands. Now, I have a personal story about this, because I was living in Illinois at that time, and Dank Vapes is one of these. What it was a cartridge company, pretty much. It was a packaging. You could buy it on Amazon, like back in August 2019. These just empty packages for you to put a THC cartridge into, and you could sell it to an unsuspecting person, and it says Dank Vapes and it looks like a brand. In April, I'd seen these on the street, and I'm telling somebody, I was like, I don't think this is a legit brand. It was April 2019, and they're like, what are you talking about? And I was like, nicotine's having a lot of problems with flavors, and like this is Skittles on there, and I just don't see Skittles like allowing it to have THC on anything related to it. And then, yeah, sure enough, when August happened, it was like, okay, I bet you it's Dank Vapes, and Dank Vapes was like cited in like almost like 40% of the cases. And now you can't get Dank Vapes on the street anymore, which is kind of amazing that even government stuff affects black markets or illicit markets. But yeah, it's really just a travesty because you can see the uptick in smoking after all of this, and this alarmism when it comes. Once again, there was already misinformation about nicotine and vaping, and so the CDC really did a travesty. I've heard some inside sources actually sit there and say that there was communication between several agencies to the CDC, telling them that they needed to be more transparent about the role that these illicit products were playing, and to quit trying to tie it into the mass consumer products, especially the Juul and all these, that are everywhere with people. And I guess it just fell upon deaf ears. It's also important to note that Dr. Brian King, who's now the director of the Center for Tobacco Products, was actually at the CDC during that whole time. And there's actually a transcript that you can see of him, where the reporter, I want to say it's like September 2019, a reporter's like, what's the role of THC in this? And he diverts it to like, he minimalizes it, and then he's like, oh, but there's ultrafine particles, and just goes back to this demonization of e-cigarettes, which he's been doing since at least 2015. And now he's the one in charge of determining whether we actually have access to it. So I hate eval. I try not to like talk about it at all. The only thing that I want to always kind of if I do bring it up, if it does get brought up, is just to emphasize that these were black market. And I know we're not supposed to use black market, okay, but these were underground products. These were unregulated products. By putting all these draconian bans and prohibitions on things, you're only going to force consumers to get everything from an unregulated marketplace, and that's just flying in the face of the science behind tobacco harm reduction. You'd want people to have a safer, alternative to cigarettes, not something that's more harmful because of a lack of regulations on it.
Definitely. And I wanted to say exactly the same thing, because I think a lot of policymakers and governments worldwide are using those cases and not specifying that these were illicit products actually coming from the black market. And they are trying to enforce prohibitionist approach, which will actually cause the illicit market, which doesn't make any sense. And sadly, we're trying to raise our voices against that, but it's really hard to fight that. And that's really counterproductive and sad to see. My next question, as promised, is about the misconceptions, because you've already talked about some of those, but I want you to tell us, what do you think are the most common myths that one might hear in the USA about vaping, and if by any chance those misconceptions also affect policymakers while coming up with different policies, because we've seen those types of cases in different parts of the world where policymakers do not get familiar with the science behind vaping, and they just go with the prohibitionist policies, but then those misconceptions play a big role in that. So what do you think? What's the situation like in the USA?
Okay, we'll start with the big one, because I think the one that's like really, when you look at like the WHO and the FCTC, and you look at the FDA and the policies, that e-cigarettes and vaping's just big tobacco trying to hook a new generation. That's BS. I remember when I first got started in, with vaping and stuff, and it was 2018, and like my first GFN, and I was able to meet like one of the, salespeople from one of the bigger tobacco companies. I forget which one. And I was just like, and I, starting to get my research into it. And I was like, be frank with me. Y'all thought that vaping was a gimmick. If you look at the way that the products came to market, at least, especially in the States, and I think even in Europe, and I think you saw bigger. I think you saw big tobacco companies go more quicker in Europe than they did in the States, just because of our regulatory processes. But even there, I mean, you did see a consumer driven revolution when it came to all of the innovation that was developed, in a very short time from 2007 to especially like 2014. And I know in the States, it wasn't until like 2011 that you started seeing the bigger tobacco companies buy up all these, stuff. And they're like, so when I was talking to this representative, I was like, you guys thought it was a gimmick. And they did. I mean, they literally, this wasn't, big tobacco didn't create vaping. Big tobacco actually was one of the most responsive industries to its consumers because it was forced to actually offer a safer alternative. And the fact that they're now investing in it, it should be something that's honored. And especially when you look at any other industry that's causing harm in the world, not only are you doing mandates on these industries, when you think of the auto industry and the push for electronic, vehicles, the big tobacco is the only industry that's waste. So they can only push out harmful products. Mind you, I mean, they're only coming to terms with having to push out less harmful products. And I applaud them for pushing that. That's my big first misperception, because that's, especially at the state level, that's always what I'm dealing with because of the way that we look at big tobacco. I'm not sitting here and glorifying them by all means. Vapers, do not get mad at me at this or anything, but I do think that they should be recognized for their role that they can play into tobacco harm reduction. The other misperception that flavors hook kids, and that's the only appeal to them. Flavors, adults like flavors. Bottom line, I mean, it's not like we hit a certain age. I mean, even when you look at, I always like to compare it to what are McDonald's Happy Meals? Smaller version of big of portions of McDonald's. Okay, your taste buds don't just automatically change. I do see that there are certain things in marketing and vaping that are a little bit gross. Once again, the industry has responded back. I remember back in the day at vape shows where the even smaller firms that that the vaping industry thought were appealing to kids got harangued by the industry themselves. There's a lot of really good self-policing on that. But again, I think that with the proliferation of a market that's completely unregulated, you're going to see that you have more opportunities for bad actors to come into play. The demonization of nicotine. And that's probably one of my bigger ones. I still can't believe that I'm still talking about it. And that the numbers are just really staggering. That more people as the years go on. I remember in 2018 seeing the studies that were being done on does nicotine cause lung cancer, and the amount of people who think that it does. And so the fact that that's increased, and a lot of it I do blame on the U.S. Food and Drug Administration because of the fact of the matter is, if you look at the marketplace, all of the products that are regulated, that are FDA authorized on the market, are combusted nicotine products. So you get authorized 23 e-cigarette products using the PMTA pathway. I think I did the numbers once. It was over the past 2 years, for every one e-cigarette, it approved at least 5 combustible cigarette products. So I think that needs to nicotine, yes, while addictive, does not cause any of the known harms as far as lung cancer, any of your respiratory illnesses. There might be some increase your heart rate and some issues with that. But once again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going down to that deep end. You can find problems with anything if you look deep far enough and you get the right person. I still can't believe we're talking about popcorn lung. Okay. And what always bothers me about popcorn lung is not only the study that came out with it being debunked, that they had once again, how you can manipulate science. They overheated the device to get it, but nobody talks about how the people who smoke cigarettes are exposed to way more diacetyl in a single cigarette than what they'd ever be exposed into a vaping product. And nobody that's a cigarette smoker gets popcorn lung. It's only an ailment that exists under vaping. You're right when it comes down to there's this the science seems to be missing when it comes to e-cigarettes. Like we all know, I know I've quit smoking using vaping. I know personally how it makes me feel. I've talked to so many older individuals who have their doctors have been amazed at this one. And it seems like every argument that we get, it's really just basic science. And it's like, I'm not even I don't need a PhD to understand that. Like, this just makes no sense. Like, but it's, here we're still dealing with it. But I think a lot of the misperceptions do stem from the main one, that this is big tobacco and that there's this demonization that, that they're the one industry that's went to court, lost, at least in the States. I think that they'd go travel around the world too. I think a lot of other countries started suing big tobacco after we did it in the 90s. At least in America, like, I'm just really kind of sick of hearing it, because I mean, we're Americans. We're all for a second chance or a third or a fourth. I mean, so I don't get this disdain, but I just don't get this misinformation either that continues to plague. Oh, and then the kids stuff. Okay, I could debunk that really quickly, at least in the States. And we do have, I think the States actually does have some of the best government funded studies on youth. The problem is they don't even use it themselves. So the National Youth Tobacco Survey is a really good one. I know I've been following that for years. Youth vaping peaked in 2019. It's pretty much halved since then. And also they have like reasons why kids are using e-cigarettes. Again, flavors aren't designed for hooking your kids, because that's like the fifth most cited reason on why kids that the middle and high school students in 2021 were using e-cigarettes. Overwhelmingly, a lot of them are using e-cigarettes to self-medicate. And I think that is global wide. I think that we do have a mental health crisis that is, happening among the youth everywhere. I don't think that's only an American thing. And I think going after vaping is just really sad, because you're going after a symptom, not the cause, and that you're not really getting down to what is harming our youth. And I know, at least in the States, we have a lot of kids that are dying from our fake pills. So let's go make fake vape devices for them. That's a smart move.
Thank you, Lindsay, first of all, for talking about all of those misperceptions and also debunking them on the way. That's really insightful. We're getting to our last part of the interview, and as a last question, I just wanted to ask you, what would be your message to the vapers and policymakers in the USA and globally?
Well, okay, first of all, I do want to thank World Vapers Alliance. I think you guys are doing really great at getting the adult vaping voice out there. And I got, putting a face to all the anecdotes, as that I always hear, and everything. And so I always sit there and say to people, get loud, talk to your representatives, talk to your lawmakers, and go start local, out, like local, then outward. Okay. I mean, it's easy. I know in the States, it's easy to go like scream at a congressman. They are the most removed from your life. I mean, regardless, I know with vaping, it seems like, Durbin and Raja are coming down on us. Start with, at least in the States, start with your local, hell, start with your school board. Honestly, if they're doing something on vaping, or, if you're, follow what's going on at that local level, and then start with your town, then move on to your state, or they're all called different things in different countries. And I'm an American, and my geography is terrible outside. So I don't know exactly provinces and stuff, but we go to that level and then go with the federal level. But always, never miss an opportunity to give a comment on a federal policy, by all means, and just keeps telling your story. It's really easy to get deterred in this space, especially it seems like we're always constantly putting out fires. But your voice does matter. You are, and each year that you're vaping, you are still adding to this great, everyone thinks that we're kind of an experiment, having switched from cigarettes to vaping. At least that's what I hear all the time, with these moms. My kids are not an experiment. It's been one of the best experiments I guess I've ever partaken in. I mean, I feel a lot better not smoking cigarettes. So it's stressful dealing with lawmakers, but just keep going. Yeah, that's all I can say. Just keep going.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today. We can wrap this up this time, but I learned a lot and thank you so much for the insight. I had a lot of fun listening to you, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners also did. So thank you. It was a pleasure having you.
Yes, thanks for having me, and I'll see you in Panama.
Definitely. And also, I would like to thank everyone who was watching this podcast. We'll be back in a week as usual. So stay tuned. And most importantly, vape on.